7:45. Welcome back to BT Vancouver. Protesters continue to march in solidarity for George Floyd in Minneapolis. A man who died in the custody of a white police officer have continued in the city for over a week now, and rallies have spread well beyond Minneapolis, dozens of cities across the U.S., Canada, and now other countries around the world. Joining us now is UBC professor Annette Henry. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much for having me.
So let's start with the violence, the civil unrest that we are seeing every night. When you see this, how does it make you feel?
Well, it makes me feel obviously tense because whenever there's violence, there's always people getting hurt and perhaps even more. But I'm actually quite happy that there's solidarity around the world, that people are coming together and saying this cannot happen, and that we see that this is not a Minnesota thing. It's in Canada, it's in France, it's throughout the world where there are black people in predominantly white countries, and they are dehumanized and they're subjected to violence. And it's been going on for a long time. And just as I heard on the news this morning, a black man in Alberta was taking out his groceries, and an incident happened, and he said, you know, usually I would have just let it go, but I'm going to speak about this. So I think people are becoming more aware of what is happening in our society, because people aren't afraid to speak out, just as, for example, the Me Too. Women have been saying, oh, that's just how men are, or, oh, I'm not going to talk about this, or I don't want my partner or my friends or my parents to know about this. But now women are saying, no, enough is enough. So I think that makes me happy.
And we know these protests are for George, but as you said, it stems from years of race issues in the U.S., all around the world, that were never solved. Over 50 years ago, there was a presidential report tracing the sources of fiery protests in black communities across the U.S., and many of these issues still remain. You know, housing, job opportunities, policing, they were at the top of the list of frustrations. Yes.
Well, you know, the report is just confirming what the ways in which the system has been set up, because black people were brought to the Americas, and I say the Americas because I mean, you know, North and South and Central America. Black people were brought to the Americas to be exploited and dehumanized, and actually to be free labor. And so once that free labor stopped, and actually, this is well documented in the film 13th, and it was highlighted in Netflix years ago. And perhaps viewers would like to go back and type in 13th, the 13th Amendment, because the 13th Amendment talks about not having slavery except for certain conditions, and one of which is criminalization. So they started to criminalize black men and put them in jail for small things. And for example, stealing little petty crimes, and that's what is still going on. So that criminalization is free labor. So the things that you and I buy at Walmart, or the parts from Microsoft, they're made by free labor from black prisoners. And so there's a whole system in place, and black people have been sold a bill of goods. They have poor education, poor health care. So they're second-class citizens with second-class status. And so in many ways, I think this is what the revolt is about, is enough is enough. You know, I was watching PBS a couple of days ago, and there was a young teenager, and the anchor person said, well, what do you want people to understand? And he said that I'm valuable, that I'm as equal as anybody else, that I'm as comparable as anybody else. And so I think in many ways, to see George Floyd, you know, treated like less than an animal. I mean, we treat our pets better than that, you know, and to see how black people are dehumanized over and over and over again, I think that is what is going on. So the report is basically saying what we know, but also how a system has set in place something that benefits the dominant group.
So we know,
and black people, of course, yeah.
We know this issue is everywhere. Justin Trudeau yesterday, he denounced racism on both sides of the border. So what can the average person do who wants to create positive change? What can we do? How can we move forward from this disaster?
Well, let's just talk about us as Canadians, too. One of the things that we can do is not say, oh, how wonderful that we live here in Canada and we don't have these issues. And yes, we have not had the kinds of rioting that has traditionally been in the United States, but we do have racism. And I think we are pretty cozy here, and we like to think that racism doesn't exist. But I think one of the biggest things, but the hardest things to do, is to acknowledge that we live in a society where there are these power dynamics, where there is something called racism, and how we participate in it without even realizing it in many ways.
So being more aware and educating ourselves. Annette, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I really hope that we can continue this conversation next week.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mary. Thank you.
All right. That is Annette Henry with UBC Institute for Social Justice.